Mexico. Night. A convoy crosses the border into the United States. It isn't carrying drugs. It isn't carrying weapons. It's carrying cash. Bags full of money. Used bills. Dirty. Marked by the business that generated them. That money walks into a bank branch. It doesn't hide. It doesn't disguise itself. It gets deposited. Cartels didn't hide their money. They deposited it. And the bank knew. That bank was HSBC. One of the largest financial institutions in the world. Present in dozens of countries. With millions of clients. And a reputation built over more than a century. Built on stability. Trust. Security. But behind that image, there was something else. A constant flow of money that shouldn't have been there. How money laundering works. To understand how it happened, you have to understand how criminal money works. Generating it isn't enough. You have to integrate it. Make it usable. Move it without raising suspicion. Turn it into something clean. And for that you need access to the financial system. You need banks. For years, criminal organizations in Latin America were generating billions in cash. But cash has limits. You can't use it easily at scale. You can't invest it. You can't move it internationally without risk. It needs to be transformed. And that process has a name: money laundering. Laundering isn't complex at its core. It's about introducing illegal money into the system. Moving it through multiple transactions. And making it appear legitimate. But it requires something critical: a point of entry. A bank willing or unable to stop it. The expansion in the 2000s, HSBC was aggressively expanding its global presence. Especially in emerging markets. Latin America. Asia. Regions with high growth. But also with high risk. Where financial controls were weaker. And the opportunities more ambiguous. HSBC's Mexican subsidiary became a key entry point. A channel. Billions in cash began flowing through its branches. Amounts that, under normal circumstances, should have triggered immediate alarms. But they didn't. Or not enough. Because the problem wasn't a single error. It was structural. Deficient controls. Inefficient monitoring systems. Ignored alerts. Processes designed to facilitate transactions, not to question them. The priority was growth. Not friction. The money kept coming in. And in. And in. Without clear justification. Without solid traceability. But with a consistency that made it seem normal. That's the danger when the abnormal becomes routine. Active the illusion and the ignored warnings. The illusion was perfect. From the outside, HSBC remained a solid global bank. Regulated. Audited. Respected. Traditional clients saw nothing unusual. Financial reports showed no crisis. Everything seemed to be working, but beneath that surface, the system was being used. At scale. The signals were there. Unusual transfers. Massive cash deposits. Flows from high-risk regions. But each signal in isolation seemed manageable. Explainable. Ignorable. Until they accumulated. Later investigations would reveal something more unsettling. It wasn't just incompetence. There was internal knowledge. Warnings. Reports. People inside the bank who identified risk. Who flagged problems. Who raised concerns about potential money laundering links. But those warnings didn't translate into effective action. Not at the necessary level. Not in time. And the bank knew. Not necessarily every individual. Not necessarily every employee. But as an organization, there was enough information to act. And it didn't act with the required urgency. Act to the scale of the problem. The money didn't only come from Mexico. It also flowed from other regions, including countries linked to illicit financing. The system allowed transfers that should have been blocked. Or at least investigated more rigorously. But they weren't. Because blocking transactions reduces revenue. Because questioning clients generates friction. And in systems designed to grow, friction is the enemy. But eventually the pattern became too large to ignore. Too visible. Too systematic. In 2012, the case exploded publicly. The United States Senate published a devastating report. Specific details: money flows linked to cartels, systematic failures in anti-money laundering controls, deficiencies in internal oversight. The problem was no longer internal. It was public. HSBC was no longer just a global bank. It was a channel that had allowed the movement of billions of dollars of illicit origin. Not by explicit design, but through structural negligence, through repeated failures, through decisions that prioritized business over control. By the fine that changed nothing, the case became one of the largest money laundering scandals in modern banking history. But the most critical part came after the resolution, because this is where many expected more severe consequences. Criminal prosecutions, individual accountability, but that didn't happen at the scale many anticipated. Instead, there was a settlement. HSBC agreed to pay a fine, approximately $1.9 billion. An enormous figure, but manageable for a bank of that size. It didn't involve losing the banking license. It didn't involve shutting down operations. It didn't involve mass imprisonment of executives. The bank kept operating. And that generated a more uncomfortable question. Is a fine sufficient when the system has facilitated the movement of criminal money at scale? Because from a strictly economic perspective, the fine can be interpreted as a cost. A high cost, but a cost nonetheless. And that creates a structural risk. If the consequences aren't existential, the incentive to change may be limited. The system, the case made one thing clear. The problem isn't just identifying illicit money. It's having the will to stop it. Because systems can detect anomalies, but the final decisions are made by people. And those decisions are shaped by incentives. Cartels didn't hide their money. They deposited it. That phrase summarizes the paradox. The system that should have been a barrier became a channel. And that isn't unique to one bank. It's a potential characteristic of any global financial system, where volume is massive, where transactions are constant, and where oversight is always one step behind innovation. The HSBC case is not just about crime. It's about structure, about incentives, about how institutions designed to manage risk can, under certain conditions, amplify it. Because money laundering doesn't require absolute complicity. It requires sufficient negligence, sufficient ambiguity, sufficient space to operate. And when that space exists inside large institutions, the impact multiplies. The exposure of HSBC didn't close the problem. It only made it visible. Because as long as illicit money exists, there will be attempts to integrate it. And as long as institutions prioritize volume over control, there will be points of entry. And the bank knew, not as an individual accusation, but as a systemic warning. Because the real risk isn't that crime exists. That is constant. The risk is that the system designed to contain it absorbs it without sufficient resistance. And when that happens, the line between legal and illegal doesn't disappear. But it becomes diffuse enough for money to flow, without real obstacles, until someone decides to look closely. And when they finally look closely, it's already too late to prevent it from having happened.